mention talking and working with a ton of different guys, from Fortune 500 executives to professional athletes to celebrity actors. And overall and in general, most people would assume that their problems are much different. But you actually said they aren't. I want you to kind of dive in and talk about what you mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to working with individuals at different levels, at the very end of the day, we're all humans. And so a lot of the things that I find that even the individuals, whether they're a Fortune 500 executive or a former professional athlete, deal with are much of the same that the people that I work with who are just at the beginning. And at the very, very baseline level, it's all about their nervous system regulation, understanding how their brain and heart coherence play a role in how they show up every single day. And it shows up in bigger ways with individuals with more on the line. So for instance, if it's a Fortune 500 executive who works for a $1 billion company and he has thousands of employees underneath him, it seems like a bigger problem, but at the end of the day, it's the same exact problem in terms of him being out of balance, him not really having the mental and emotional skills to stay grounded every single day to lead his team effectively. It just shows up and there's more of a light on it in that sense. And so when I think about that, it's very helpful to break that down, in my opinion, because that means that no one is different than anyone else. And it also means that all the tools that I use with the highest level individuals is also still available to the individuals who are just getting started. And so if you can utilize those, no matter where you're at in the journey, you are already going to get a step ahead with where you're at.
I like that, because the way you're talking about it is people will look at circumstances and things going on in their world, and they'll think that they're different, but what you're actually talking about is this internal game that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, my biggest mission is, and what I've found even in my own journey, and this is why we will get into this, I'm sure, is understanding like, what is it for me to want to help these guys? Well, why am I helping these guys? Because I've seen it firsthand in my own experience that when we do have the mental skills, the emotional skills to take on all of the chaos that comes with running a big business or handling things at home, those are the things that we can rely on, because at the end of the day, without those, we are just running with a chicken with our head cut off. And all day long with that, we then allow for that to then be very reactive in the way we show up at work, at home, and so many different other areas of our life.
Yeah, it's almost we think to ourselves that by doing all those things then so much, that'll then create the space where we can then slow down and do everything that you're talking about. But it's really different.
Yeah. Well, that to me is more of a backwards approach of thinking, and thinking that once I reach a certain level, then all of a sudden I'm going to have all of this space to slow down and take care of myself. But if anybody is actually realistic about their life, at least in my own experience and many of the clients they work with, things just get busier and busier. We get our schedule filled with more and more stuff. So for instance, I'll use myself for example. Of course, I have my own business. I have a longtime girlfriend. We have a dog. But very soon, we may take the next steps to get married and then have kids, and then obviously having multiple kids. And so we think that, once I get to a certain level, things will slow down, when in actuality, they're actually going to speed up and your schedule is going to get more and more crammed. So by delaying this, you're actually putting it off, when in reality, if you can put some of these foundational pieces in place, it actually allows for when life does get even more busy, because inevitably it will, you have the foundation to withhold everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's like there's no right time. It's just right now, right? It's like this is when you do it, because in your experience working with the men that you've worked with, they're dealing with the same stuff, just with different circumstances.
Yeah, it reminds me of the analogy that many people have used and that I've heard, is that the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. We can't go back in time. So the next best time is today. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to some of this work, is putting it off any longer is just doing everyone and yourself a disservice.
Yeah. So I'm really curious, because you keep talking about, things are speeding up and things are going, and especially for men, if they're working on things externally that they're thinking is going to bring all these different internal things, they're moving at a rapid rate, and there's a lot going on. So if you were in the head of one of those men as they were integrating every day, what would you hear? What would be going on inside there?
Well, first and foremost, it's going to feel uncomfortable if they're starting something brand new. So for instance, I'll just use the example of if individuals are used to running at full speed, so I think of like a car, like running at full speed ahead, full RPMs, foot on the gas all day long, and that's all they're used to. The moment that they actually slow down or press the brake to give themselves some relief in a healthy way, not just, oh, I'm going to get a drink and take the edge off, that in itself is going to feel uncomfortable because it's unnatural to them. So they're going to start to question, what is this really doing for me? Is this worth it? Should I just go back to what I was doing? And in that moment, that's essentially where they have a choice to double down on this foundational work that is going to help them and know that it's more of a delayed gratification long game. Because if you think about, I use a lot of the work that I do in the analogy of the gym, because for guys, it's very easy to understand.
Sure.
And it's like you go into the gym, and the first time you go into the gym and you start to hit that bench press, you don't all of a sudden, when you leave that gym, you might have a pump, but you haven't grown your chest right away. It takes time and it takes effort. So there's just that beginning phase that I feel like when I think about being in the head of the guys that I work with, they have to understand that that moment is actually a test for them to say, are you going to go back to your old ways, or are you going to take a stand for what you said you were going to do? And in doing so, that creates a level of confidence, and it actually is proving to themselves that this is the right path.
I like that. There's just that pause, right? That space for them to go, right, what do I choose? Do I choose old patterns or behaviors, or do I actually choose which you said is uncomfortable, but ultimately can keep me on track to kind of the work that I want to be able to do on myself?
Well, I also often use in my trainings and talking with clients, and I like to nerd out on some of the neuroscience-backed part of it about neuroplasticity. And what you're talking about is that deep level of awareness to know, when am I coming up to a fork in the road and which path am I going to take? And so the example that I often use is, for many of us guys, we've created these patterns, these habits, these behaviors that are literally like in our mind, the Autobahn. Right? They're huge. They're like an 8-lane highway. You can go as fast as you want, and you can loop them 1,000,000 times, and it happens in a microsecond. But when we can come up to a fork in the road and realize that that pattern, that behavior, that belief is only going to basically replay itself, and we actually take a stand to go down that gravel road, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's unfamiliar, it's dark, it's not very lit, but we know that it could lead us to something new. And so we start to go down that, and the first step, like you said, is creating a deep level awareness to know when I'm at that fork in the road. And then that's where you take willpower and action to go the opposite way. And when you do, the interesting thing that I've found and learned about when it comes to neuroplasticity is the glue that holds all of our connections in our brain. There's only so much of it in the brain. So I like to think about it as, if we continue to go down that gravel road, the maintenance crew, aka the glue in the brain that kept up the Autobahn, is going to have no choice but to have to go over and build up this to now a paved road, and then eventually a 2-lane road and a 4-way highway. And when that happens, the crews that used to put together the Autobahn and hold that together and keep it up with maintenance, there's not enough of them. So they go over here, this starts to degrade, you start to create a brand new pattern and a brand new behavior, and that's how individuals develop a brand new mindset. And so I like to put it in a visual context, because I'm a visual learner. So to me, that's what I always see, and it comes back to guys knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable at first, because it's still a gravel, rocky road that doesn't have many lights on, and not many people are out on it. So you're starting to question yourself, am I going down the right path? But then over time, you realize that that can change really quickly, and that it'll start to become more natural and automatic.
Yeah. One of the things, as you're just talking about this, one of the things that's kind of resonating with me is, you're coming to this man and you're like, there's proactive ways to do this. Right? We don't have to react to it all.
Right.
Because even in what you're describing, they'll get to a point and then they'll hit that wall. So, the idea around, I guess, why won't men see this as urgent until like they're actually at that breaking point?
That's interesting. So typically we've been taught that we can just push through, that we can just grind, we can just chase success, and eventually that's when all of our stress will subside and we'll be eternally happy. And then individuals reach a certain level and realize that's not how it actually goes. So we will wait till the pain of changing becomes so great that we actually do something about it. And so it's this mindset shift to remind ourselves that our brain will often choose the familiar hell over the unfamiliar heaven. So they'll keep going back to the things that aren't really helping them, but because of the familiarity there, they don't move away from it. So when it comes to, oh, I don't really need to do this, this isn't very urgent, all they're saying is, I don't want to move away from the comfort and the familiarity that I've created. It's not that it's not important, it's just I can't see it that way because I've hardwired my brain to realize that that's not that important right now. And then inevitably, they wait to change until their back's up against the wall. So I always ask, well, if let's say you are waiting to change and you want to grow, right? And I always go back to this gym analogy, and I think it's very easy to go to. Are you going to wait till you are 600 pounds overweight to then start going to the gym and start paying attention to your food, your nutrition, and your sleep? Or are you going to do that a little bit like once you start to notice some changes? And so guys, for the mental and emotional fitness piece, if you will, they will wait, per se, till they're 600 pounds overweight to actually then make a change. Then it's so much harder. It's such a big uphill battle. And at that point, the distance between where they are now to where they actually want to be is so great that it is overwhelming to them, and then they just never change.
Yeah. I like that analogy a lot. It makes so much sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not going to wait until you get to the far extreme when it comes to our physical health, right? You're going to notice some of those small changes, and you're going to go, wait a second, I gotta dial this back in. And there's smaller tweaks and adjustments, which can be sustainable over a long period of time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive in a little bit. I know you were talking about it before, using yourself as an example.
Sure.
Let's dive into just your story.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know what got you started into this world of personal development.
Well, I always share that one of the first things that I think that was one of the most foundational pieces for me, flashback all the way to when I was like 10 or 11, when my dad used to take me with him to the YMCA. And so I used to go play basketball, but then I was always interested, well, he's going in the weight room. Why is he always going in the weight room? And I felt like that's where I saw all the confident, all the strong, all the real men going into. So I was curious. And so I got signed up, and I could only go in with a chaperone, and I had to get a little yellow card, and I had to show it at the front desk to show that I could go into the weight room. Couldn't use any dumbbells, couldn't use any free weights. I only was able to use machines, and they gave me this little clipboard with the sheet, and it was able to track all the numbers that I got. And that to me was just a realization that when it comes to personal development, if you can track your progress, if you can set a goal for yourself and actually break it down in simple steps, that can actually get you excited to move into. So I think that very early on was very important to me, because I learned that, okay, you can work on yourself and you continue to grow, and that builds a level of confidence. So that's one thing for sure. Then later on, when I was around 23, 24, is when I started to focus more on the internal personal development journey, reading lots of self-development books, self-help books, podcasts, and getting into journaling, meditation, and understanding all of that. And that was important to me because at the time I was in a really dark place. I had just came off of, being the decade full from like 14 to 24, full of drugs and alcohol and partying and doing things that unknowingly at the time were me just escaping the mental and emotional struggles that I was dealing with. And so when I finally got to that point and realized that my life really only had two trajectories, I realized that this isn't what the life that I wanted to be living. And so I started to dive into this. And here we are nearly a decade later, and things have changed so much. And so that's really one of the first things that got me into it. And then being able to see some of the progress and change, first for myself, but then actually hearing it from the people around me was so beneficial. And then it allowed for me to keep on with this process. And then over time, realize how important it is for so many men to be able to take that step and then be able to be the guide for them to do that.
It kind of sounds like you're looking back at yourself X amount of years ago and being like, I'm actually now trying to be the person I would have wanted to have been for 20-year-old Pat. Yeah,
100%. And I always heard Lewis Howes, who was one of the first podcasts that I always listened to. And actually, I was fortunate enough, I believe it was a year or two ago, to meet him in person at one of the Dr. Joe Dispenza retreats. And one of the things that he shared very early on was you are always in the best position to help individuals who might be a couple years behind you or a couple stages behind you. But one thing that I had to remember was that didn't just mean age, because I work with guys that have kids my age. And so it's a reminder that it's a couple steps behind you in the skill or the problem that you help work with. And so guys can still be 50, 55, almost 60 with grandkids, and individuals or kids my age, but might not have the mental and emotional skills that I've developed. Now, they are still leaps and bounds ahead of me in their industry and what they know as a parent and as a business owner or as an executive, but they might not have the mental and emotional skills. And that really was a mindset shift for me to realize that when I step in to work with these guys, that yes, I might not have all of the knowledge and expertise that they have in certain areas, but I do have a level of expertise in another area. And being able to allow for them to see that and then leverage that, it's really empowering to know that someone oftentimes half their age, or can be half their age, has the ability to make such a big shift for them in their life.
Yeah, I think it's so important too to like, when you talk about that, I hear you say that like, you're almost just owning what you know, right? You're not trying to do all these other things because these men are in different industries, different careers, whatever amount of experience, whether that be related to career or related to life. And you're like, cool, all that's wonderful. I come in specifically through blank.
Right. Yeah, and yesterday I actually had someone ask me, and they were saying, hey, just so you know, we're going to get on a call because he was sharing some of the things that he was working through. And he said, just so you know, I actually have a coach. I have a coach, but he's a business coach. And so I told him, I said very early on, my whole goal with all my clients, I'm not a business coach. I'm not a business advisor. I don't know your business more than you do by any means. And most of the time, I'm not going to know the level of expertise that you have either in whatever industry you're in. But what I know is that if I can help the individual amplify who he is, how he shows up, inevitably it will show up in their business. So yes, I don't make promises or guarantees that I can help you grow your business or scale or do whatever it is, but I can assure you that when you grow and you are the main focal point of your business, it's only a matter of time before your business starts to follow suit.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about this journey from early on, starting in the weight room with your clipboard and all that stuff, all the way to then kind of just going through the ups and downs of life. I think everyone can relate to that in some capacity. And then leaning into just this personal development journey for yourself. So has Pat always been doing work related to coaching and this work in personal development, or what came before, the work that you do today?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. I started working very early on. I got the work ethic from my mom and my dad. So I saw, one of the biggest things that I'll say is, that my dad helped me with was being able to grow personally, because he obviously took me to the YMCA. We'd go to the gym. But then I also saw my mom work, and she had a flexible schedule. I noticed that if I was sick at home, she would take time off work and make sure that I was taken care of. She always had Fridays off. And I always thought, like, that's really unique and cool. So I noticed those things, and I started to work myself. So one of my first jobs very early on was being the landscaper for my aunt and uncle's estate, if you will. And so there's enough fields to me to be on the tractor, whether it was the big tractor in the air-conditioned part of the John Deere, or whether I was on the zero turn, or whether I was picking weeds. Like, I was always doing something. And then as I started to get a little bit older, I started to work in factories. I'm from Northwest Indiana, a place called Elkhart, Indiana. It's actually the RV capital of the world. Oh, wow. And I used to work in one of the wood mill factories that created components for an RV. And so I'd go in, and this was when I was in high school, so about 15, 16, 17. I'd go in 4 a.m., be done by noon. And that really started to develop my idea of, like, what does it take to, have a work ethic? And so went to school at Indiana University, graduated with a business management degree. And right after that, I went right back to my hometown in Elkhart and started to work for a big corporation called Lippert Components. That's when I jumped into their leadership development team program. And so basically from 2015 to 2022, when I took the leap to go all in on my business, I had worked in various different sales roles in the recreational vehicle and marine industry. And, when I look back, it was really interesting because now that I work with individuals who might be 5, 10, 15 years ahead of me just in chronological age, I realized I was doing that same thing right when I got out of college. My first job out of college, I started as a supervisor for this manufacturing facility, and I was over 20, 30 people, and many of them were 40 or 50 years old, and there I was, this young clean-shaven 23-year-old that really didn't know what he was doing, but I had to dive in and be able to create a level of confidence to say, all right, I'm here for a reason, and I'm not going to let some optic of age be the difference maker for me to show up. And then that really transitioned in all of the jobs that I worked with. I was one of the young guys in many of the companies that I worked with. And even though that was there, I attribute a lot of the work that I did outside of the gym, outside of office or outside of work, the gym, the personal development stuff, understanding meditation, understanding how to leverage mental and emotional skills that allowed for me to keep up with the guys who were double my age, who had been in the industry that I was in for nearly the same amount of time I had been alive. And that was something really unique to me that I saw, was that you can be in the same room with people and still have the same level of expertise if you're able to manage your state. And
Sure.
The one thing that I share, and I think is really interesting, is how you show up is how you go up. And so what I mean by that is it takes a level of intelligence, IQ, if you will, to get into the room, to potentially get the job. But what separates the individuals who just stay in that same role to going up is how they show up, their state, how they're perceived in a room with individuals. No matter if you're 23, 24, 25 in a room with 50, 60-year-olds, if you can bring that level of confidence, that level of energy, awareness, and presence to that room, they're going to notice that. And whether they notice it consciously, they're going to know it unconsciously because they're going to feel that. And that, to me, is what allowed, in my personal opinion, allowed for me to elevate in the jobs that I was at a rapid rate.
Yeah, I like that. And kind of just thinking about it, I appreciate you kind of diving into just that journey of that work experience throughout. And, I think so much of us as individuals and what we go through, regardless, helps us notice themes and trends and different things that kind of continue to shape over time.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, in those roles, being young, being in leadership or management positions, throughout those years, what did you actually start to notice that kind of led and evolved to the work you do today as a coach?
Well, one thing that I noticed right away was that by me being able to take care of myself physically, mentally, and emotionally and spiritually, I was able to show up way different at work and being able to lead with a level of being present, not being reactive. I had been on teams and there was other supervisors, specifically in my first role, where I would notice that you could almost tell what did they do outside of work, because when they came into work, they would be angry. They would never have a smile on their face. And then the teams they tried to lead would also not perform at the level that they wanted them to, because I always feel like it's a top-down approach. The individuals underneath you are always going to look up to you. And if you're bringing that energy or that vibe, if you will,
Sure.
it's contagious. And so you can utilize it to your advantage, or it can be a disadvantage to you. So I noticed that right away, that I can use this to an advantage. And then when I look at some of my other roles, when I was more focused on sales roles and an outside role, when I would go in and step in with brand new clients, individuals I've never met before, who were like, who the heck is this guy? I was able to leverage a lot of that, knowing that if I can just bring that level of presence and energy to this conversation, that I have a higher likelihood of making a connection with them, being able to allow for them to trust me, get to know me, and then inevitably do business with me. So I wouldn't call it manipulation, but to some degree, I knew just the psychology of, if I can come in and if I can be laid back and confident in how I show up, that's going to allow for me to get a higher likelihood of growing my business. At the end of the day, if you're in sales, it's all about relationships. So what can you do to leverage that? And so I noticed that by me taking an effort, even if it took time in the morning to get settled with utilizing meditation or journaling, or taking time for me to physically move my body and knowing how the endorphins work with that, that allowed for me to really step in a different way that most people weren't willing to do. But I don't think that they were able to see the reciprocal effect that's available to them when they do take that into consideration.